The automatic doors of Metropolitan General Hospital's emergency department slid open with a mechanical hiss, and Sarah Martinez stepped through carrying everything she owned in a faded black backpack and a plastic grocery bag. Her scrubs were the kind you could buy 3 for $20 at Walmart, pale blue cotton that had seen better days, with loose threads at the seams and a small bleach stain near the left pocket that she'd tried unsuccessfully to hide with a fabric marker. Her sneakers squeaked against the polished linoleum floor. Generic white canvas shoes that had clearly walked many miles before arriving here. The nursing station buzzed with the usual morning energy, but conversations died mid-sentence as Sarah approached. 5 nurses clustered around the central desk, their designer scrubs creating a rainbow of expensive fabrics. Cherokee Infinity, Figs, Janu, each outfit worth more than Sarah's entire wardrobe. Their perfectly styled hair caught the fluorescent lights, and their matching accessories spoke of comfortable salaries and disposable income. "You must be the new girl," said Victoria Ashford, the head nurse, without looking up from her tablet. Her voice carried the kind of dismissive tone usually reserved for telemarketers and door-to-door salespeople. Victoria's platinum blonde hair was pulled back in an elaborate bun secured with what appeared to be a genuine silver clip, and her navy blue Fig scrubs fit like they'd been tailored specifically for her frame. "Sarah Martinez," Sarah replied quietly, extending her hand. Victoria glanced at it briefly, but didn't reciprocate the gesture, instead making a show of sanitizing her hands with the dispenser mounted on the desk. "Right. Well, Sarah, welcome to the real world." Victoria's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "I trust you're ready for something a bit more challenging than whatever community college simulation lab you're used to." The other nurses exchanged knowing looks. Jessica, a redhead with perfectly applied makeup despite the early hour, snorted softly. "Did you see her application? No previous hospital experience. Probably one of those accelerated program graduates who think they know everything after 18 months of classes." Sarah's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but she said nothing. She'd learned long ago that some battles weren't worth fighting, at least not immediately. "Let's see what our little charity case can handle," Victoria announced, deliberately speaking loud enough for the entire nursing station to hear. She grabbed a clipboard and began flipping through patient assignments with theatrical flair. "Room 3 has Mr. Henderson. He's been here since midnight, completely intoxicated, belligerent, and has already tried to grab 2 nurses. Room 7 is little Emma, age 4, screaming bloody murder because she needs stitches on her forehead. And room 12, Victoria paused for dramatic effect, is Mr. Kowalski, 83 years old. Keeps removing his oxygen mask and trying to leave AA every 5 minutes. The assignments were clearly designed to break a new nurse's spirit. These were the patients that even experienced staff dreaded, the ones that tested patience and skill in equal measure. Sarah simply nodded and took the clipboard. "Any questions?" Victoria asked with mock sweetness. "Just one," Sarah replied, her voice steady. "Where do you keep the restraint protocols?" The question caught Victoria off guard. Most new nurses would have asked about backup procedures or when to call for help. Instead, Sarah was already thinking tactically about patient management. "Second drawer, blue binder," Jessica answered reluctantly, pointing to a filing cabinet. "But you might want to call security first with Henderson. He's been asking for a fight all night." Sarah walked toward room 3 without another word, her worn sneakers silent against the floor despite their earlier squeaking. Through the glass partition, she could see Mr. Henderson, a large man in his 40s, with bloodshot eyes and the aggressive posture of someone looking for trouble. He was sitting on the edge of the examination table, swaying slightly, his hospital gown askew and his fists clenched. The nurses watched from the station as Sarah entered the room, expecting to see her emerge within minutes, either calling for security or in tears. Instead, they witnessed something unexpected. Sarah approached Henderson calmly, speaking in low tones they couldn't hear through the glass. Within moments, Henderson's aggressive posture began to relax. Sarah moved to his side, and suddenly Henderson went completely limp, slumping forward as if he'd fallen asleep. "What the hell?" Victoria muttered, standing up from her chair. Through the window, they watched Sarah gently guide the unconscious Henderson back onto the examination table, positioning him safely on his side in recovery position. She checked his pulse, examined his pupils with a penlight, and then calmly walked to the nurse's station. "Mr. Henderson is resting comfortably," Sarah reported. "He should sleep for about 2 hours. When he wakes up, he'll be significantly less agitated." "How did you?" Jessica started to ask. "Pressure point technique," Sarah replied matter-of-factly. "Sometimes it's more effective than chemical sedation, and there are no side effects." The nurses stared at her in stunned silence. Pressure point techniques weren't taught in nursing school. They were advanced skills typically known only to martial artists, military personnel, or specialized medical professionals. "Where exactly did you learn that?" Victoria demanded, her voice sharp with suspicion. "Experience," Sarah answered simply. Already walking toward room 7, where 4-year-old Emma's cries could be heard echoing down the hallway. The morning continued with Sarah methodically working through her assigned patients. Emma, the screaming toddler, was calmed with a combination of distraction techniques and what appeared to be child psychology expertise that went far beyond basic nursing training. Mr. Kowalski, the elderly man determined to remove his oxygen mask, found himself engaged in a chess game that Sarah had improvised using tongue depressors and medical tape, keeping him occupied and compliant. During the lunch break, the nursing clique gathered in the break room. Their expensive salads and artisanal sandwiches spread across the table like a magazine photo shoot. Sarah sat alone in the corner, methodically eating a peanut butter sandwich from a brown paper bag, washing it down with water from a plastic bottle she'd refilled at the drinking fountain. "Look at her," whispered Amanda, a brunette whose scrubs probably cost more than Sarah's monthly grocery budget. "Eating like she's homeless or something." "Maybe she is," Jessica added with a cruel laugh. "Did you see those shoes? I wouldn't donate those to Goodwill." "And that backpack," Victoria chimed in, cutting her organic kale salad with a plastic fork. "Looks like something a high school student would carry. Very professional." Their laughter echoed across the break room, intentionally loud enough for Sarah to hear. She continued eating her sandwich without reaction, her dark eyes focused on something beyond the window, perhaps the helicopter landing pad visible in the distance. Though none of the nurses paid attention to what held her gaze. "I bet she didn't even go to a real nursing school," Amanda continued. "Probably one of those online programs where you can get a degree in 6 months. Or maybe she's here on some kind of charity program," Jessica suggested. "You know, helping the underprivileged get into healthcare." Sarah finished her sandwich, carefully folded the brown paper bag, and placed it in her backpack. As she stood to leave, Victoria called out with false sweetness, "Sarah, honey, if you need help with anything, basic procedures or hospital protocols, don't hesitate to ask. We're all here to help." The condescension in her voice was unmistakable, and the other nurses barely contained their snickers. Sarah paused at the doorway, her hand on the frame, and for just a moment, something flickered in her eyes, not hurt or embarrassment, but something harder, more dangerous. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I'll keep that in mind." As she walked away, none of them noticed the way she moved with the precise, economical gait of someone trained for combat, or the way her eyes automatically scanned exits and potential threats. They saw only what they wanted to see, a poor, inexperienced nurse who didn't belong in their world of designer scrubs and Professional superiority. They had no idea that their mockery was about to come back to haunt them in ways they could never imagine. The afternoon shift at Metropolitan General had settled into its usual rhythm when the ambulance bay doors burst open with a violence that shattered the relative calm. Two paramedics rushed through, their faces grim beneath the harsh fluorescent lights, pushing a gurney that carried what looked like a construction worker impaled by a steel reinforcement rod. The metal bar, roughly 3 feet long and an inch thick, protruded from his chest at an angle that made everyone in the emergency department freeze. Male, approximately 35, fell from scaffolding onto rebar. The lead paramedic shouted as they wheeled him toward Trauma Bay 1. Rod entered through the right anterior chest wall. Unknown depth of penetration. BP dropping fast started at 120/80. Now down to 90/60. Pulse is thready at 110. Dr. Richard Pemberton, the attending physician, rushed to meet them, his face paling as he saw the extent of the injury. The steel rod entered the patient's chest, just below the right clavicle and angled downward toward the heart. Blood seeped around the entry point, but not in the torrential flow that would indicate a major vessel had been severed yet. "Jesus Christ," Dr. Pemberton muttered, his hands hovering uncertainly over the patient. "Get me a chest x-ray, stat. And call cardiothorax surgery. We need Dr. Morrison down here immediately." Victoria and her nursing team swarmed around the trauma bay, their earlier confidence evaporating as they faced a situation none of them had encountered before. The patient, whose name tag read Miguel Santos, was conscious but growing increasingly pale, his breathing shallow and labored. "Doctor." His pressures dropping again, Jessica called out from the monitor. 85/55 now. "I can see that." Dr. Pemberton snapped, sweat beading on his forehead despite the air conditioning. He stared at the steel rod, paralyzed by the complexity of the situation. One wrong move could shift the metal and pierce the heart or a major vessel, killing the patient instantly. Sarah had been restocking supplies in the adjacent bay when the commotion began. She moved quietly to the doorway of Trauma Bay 1, observing the scene with the same calm demeanor she'd maintained all day. But now, watching the medical team's growing panic, something shifted in her posture. Her shoulders squared, her breathing deepened, and her eyes took on a laser-like focus that none of her colleagues had seen before. "Where's the x-ray?" Dr. Pemberton demanded, his voice rising with desperation. "Radiology is backed up," Amanda replied, her voice shaking. "They said at least 10 minutes. 10 minutes? Dr. Pemberton's face flushed red. "This man doesn't have 10 minutes. His pressure is Dr." Miguel Santos whispered weakly from the gurney, his eyes wide with terror. "Am I going to die?" The question hung in the air like a death sentence. Dr. Pemberton opened his mouth, but no words came. He'd been practicing emergency medicine for 15 years, but this was beyond his expertise. The steel rod was positioned at such a critical angle that any attempt to remove it without proper imaging and surgical backup could be fatal. "His oxygen saturation is dropping," Victoria announced, her usual commanding presence reduced to barely controlled panic. 92% and falling. Sarah stepped forward from the doorway, her movement so fluid and purposeful that it drew every eye in the room. "Doctor, may I suggest something?" Dr. Pemberton looked at her with a mixture of desperation and irritation. "Not now, nurse. This isn't a teaching moment." "With respect, sir," Sarah continued, her voice carrying an authority that seemed to come from nowhere. "That rod is approximately 2 millimeters from the right ventricle. If we wait for imaging and surgery, he'll exsanguinate internally before they can get here." The room fell silent except for the beeping of monitors and Miguel's labored breathing. Dr. Pemberton stared at Sarah in shock. "How could you possibly know that without an x-ray?" Sarah moved closer to the patient, her eyes scanning the entry wound with the precision of a trained surgeon. The angle of entry, the patient's symptoms, and the fact that he's not bleeding externally suggests the rod is compressing rather than severing vessels. But that compression is causing a hemothorax that will kill him in approximately 8 minutes. That's impossible, Victoria interjected. You can't diagnose that just by looking. I need a thoracotomy tray. 2 units of O-negative blood, and everyone except essential personnel to step back, Sarah commanded. Her voice cutting through the chaos with military precision. Dr. Pemberton hesitated for a crucial moment. Everything about this situation violated protocol. Sarah was a new nurse with no apparent surgical training, yet she was speaking with the confidence of a trauma surgeon. But Miguel's blood pressure had dropped to 80/50, and his lips were turning blue. Do it, Dr. Pemberton decided. Get her what she needs. The nursing staff scrambled to comply, their earlier mockery forgotten in the face of life-and-death urgency. Sarah moved to the sink and began scrubbing, her hands with the methodical precision of someone who had done this countless times before. As she dried her hands and snapped on surgical gloves, her entire demeanor transformed. Gone was the quiet, unassuming woman they had ridiculed. In her place stood someone with the bearing of a seasoned combat surgeon. Miguel, Sarah said softly to the patient, her voice now warm and reassuring. I'm going to help you, but I need you to stay very still. Can you do that for me? Miguel nodded weakly, his eyes fixed on Sarah's face with desperate hope. Sarah positioned herself at the patient's right side, studying the steel rod with the intensity of a chess master contemplating a crucial move. The rod has created a seal, she explained to the watching medical team. Removing it will cause massive hemorrhaging, but leaving it will cause cardiac tamponade. We need to create a controlled decompression. Her hands moved with surgical precision as she palpated around the entry wound, feeling for the exact position of the rod relative to the underlying anatomy. Jessica, I need you to monitor his cardiac rhythm. Any changes in the QRS complex, you tell me immediately. How do you know about QRS complexes? Jessica whispered, but she moved to the cardiac monitor as instructed. Sarah ignored the question, her focus entirely on the patient. She picked up a scalpel from the thoracotomy tray and made a small incision parallel to the rod, about 2 inches below the entry point. Dark blood immediately began to flow from the incision, not the bright red arterial blood that would indicate a major vessel injury, but the darker venous blood of internal bleeding. Suction, Sarah ordered, and Amanda quickly complied, drawing the blood away to give Sarah a clear view of the surgical field, working with movements so precise they seemed choreographed. Sarah inserted a chest tube through her incision, carefully threading it around the steel rod. The tube immediately began draining blood and fluid from the chest cavity, and Miguel's breathing became noticeably easier. His pressure's coming up, Victoria announced in amazement. 90/60? 95/65. But Sarah wasn't finished. She took a pair of surgical forceps and began to carefully manipulate the steel rod, rotating it slightly to relieve pressure on what she somehow knew was a compressed pulmonary vessel. The movement was so subtle that it was barely visible, but the effect was immediate and dramatic. Oxygen saturation rising, Jessica called out. 96%. 98%. Blood pressure stabilizing at 110/70, Victoria added. Her voice filled with awe. Sarah stepped back from the patient, her surgical gloves stained with blood, but her expression calm and controlled. Miguel Santos was breathing normally now, his color returning to normal. The steel rod still protruding from his chest, but no longer threatening his life. Dr. Pemberton stared at Sarah, as if seeing her for the first time. Where the hell did you learn to do that? Sarah began removing her gloves with the same methodical precision she'd shown throughout the procedure. The trauma bay was silent, except for the steady beeping of monitors showing normal vital signs. "Thursday nights get busy," she replied simply, disposing of her gloves in the medical waste container as she walked toward the door, leaving behind a room full of stunned medical professionals. None of them noticed the way she moved with the confident stride of someone who had performed similar procedures under far worse conditions, in places where there were no backup teams, no safety nets, and no second chances. They had no idea that what they had just witnessed was merely a fraction of what Sarah Martinez was truly capable of. The thunderous roar began as a distant rumble, barely audible over the usual cacophony of the emergency department. At first, the staff dismissed it as construction noise from the ongoing hospital expansion project. But the sound grew steadily louder, deeper, more ominous, a rhythmic thumping that seemed to shake the very foundations of Metropolitan General Hospital. Patients in the waiting room looked up nervously from their magazines and phones. The elderly woman with the sprained ankle clutched her purse tighter. A mother pulled her feverish toddler closer to her chest. Even the usually unflappable security guard, Marcus, stepped outside to investigate the source of the increasingly deafening noise. "What the hell is that?" Victoria demanded, her voice barely audible over the growing roar. She had been reviewing patient charts at the nursing station, still trying to process what she had witnessed in Trauma Bay 130 minutes earlier. The impossible save that Sarah had performed defied everything Victoria thought she knew about nursing capabilities and hospital protocols. The automatic doors of the emergency department suddenly burst open, and Marcus stumbled back inside, his eyes wide with disbelief. "You're not going to believe this," he shouted over the noise, "but there's a military helicopter landing in our parking lot." Every head in the emergency department turned toward the windows. Through the reinforced glass, they could see a massive Navy Seahawk helicopter descending toward the hospital's parking area, its twin rotors creating a hurricane of wind that sent debris flying in all directions. Cars rocked on their suspension as the downdraft hit them. Trees bent at impossible angles. The hospital's carefully maintained landscaping was being systematically destroyed by the powerful rotor wash. "Is that thing supposed to land here?" Jessica asked, pressing her face against the window. The helicopter was enormous, much larger than the medical transport helicopters that occasionally used the hospital's designated helipad on the roof. This was clearly a military aircraft, painted in the distinctive gray of the United States Navy, with official markings and identification numbers clearly visible on its fuselage. Dr. Pemberton emerged from Trauma Bay 1, where he had been monitoring Miguel Santos's continued recovery. "What's all the noise about?" he demanded, but his question was answered as soon as he looked outside. The helicopter had touched down in the parking lot, its rotors still spinning at idle speed, creating a constant whirlwind of dust and debris. The aircraft's side door slid open with mechanical precision, and 4 figures emerged. Even from a distance, their military bearing was unmistakable. They wore dress blue uniforms with the crisp precision that only came from years of military service. Gold braiding caught the afternoon sunlight, and their synchronized movement spoke of extensive training and absolute discipline. "Oh my God," Amanda whispered, her hand pressed against the glass. "They're coming this way." The 4 naval officers marched across the parking lot in perfect formation, their polished shoes clicking against the asphalt in unison. The lead officer was a tall man with silver hair and the weathered face of someone who had spent decades at sea. His uniform bore the insignia of a full captain, and his chest was decorated with ribbons that told the story of a distinguished military career. Behind him walked 3 other officers, 2 lieutenants and what appeared to be a commander, based on the rank insignia visible on their sleeves. Each carried themselves with the same military precision, their eyes scanning the hospital entrance with the alertness of people accustomed to dangerous situations. The automatic doors of the emergency department slid open, and the four officers entered with a presence that immediately commanded attention. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Patients stared openly. Even the usual chaos of the EA seemed to pause in deference to their arrival. The lead officer's eyes swept the room with practiced efficiency, taking in every detail: the layout of the department, the positions of the staff, the locations of the exits. His gaze lingered briefly on each member of the nursing staff before moving on, clearly searching for someone specific. "I am Captain James Morrison, United States Navy," he announced, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "I need to speak with Lieutenant Commander Martinez immediately." The words hit the emergency department like a physical blow. Victoria felt her knees go weak. Jessica's mouth fell open in shock. Dr. Pemberton looked around the room in confusion, clearly trying to process what he had just heard. "Lieutenant Commander?" Victoria stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. "There must be some mistake. We don't have anyone here by that rank. This is a civilian hospital." Captain Morrison's steel-gray eyes fixed on Victoria with the intensity of a laser sight. "Ma'am, I can assure you there is no mistake. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Martinez is assigned to this facility as part of a special operations mission. I need to speak with her immediately regarding an urgent situation." The revelation hit the nursing staff like a tsunami. Sarah Martinez, the quiet, poorly dressed woman they had mocked and humiliated for the past 8 hours, was not only military personnel but an officer of significant rank. A lieutenant commander in the Navy was equivalent to a major in the Army or Air Force, a position that required years of service and exceptional performance. "Sarah?" Jessica whispered, her voice filled with disbelief. "Our Sarah? The new nurse?" One of the younger officers, a lieutenant with the bearing of someone who had seen combat, stepped forward. "Ma'am, Lieutenant Commander Martinez is not a nurse. She is a trauma surgeon and flight surgeon with over 12 years of active duty service. She has served 3 combat deployments and is one of the Navy's most decorated medical officers." The words seemed to echo in the sudden silence of the emergency department. Patients and staff alike stared at the officers in stunned amazement. The woman they had dismissed as inexperienced and poor was actually a highly trained military surgeon with more combat experience than most of the hospital's entire medical staff combined. "Where is she?" Captain Morrison demanded, his patience clearly wearing thin. "We have a situation aboard the USS Constellation. Multiple casualties, surgical suite compromised by enemy action. Lieutenant Commander Martinez is the only trauma surgeon within range capable of handling this type of emergency." Dr. Pemberton found his voice first. "Enemy action? Are we talking about active combat?" "That information is classified," the commander replied curtly. "What I can tell you is that American lives are at stake, and we need Lieutenant Commander Martinez aboard that helicopter in the next 5 minutes." As if summoned by the conversation, Sarah appeared from the supply room where she had been restocking medical equipment. But the woman who emerged was subtly different from the one who had entered. Her posture was straighter, her movements more purposeful. The transformation was so gradual that it was almost imperceptible. But those who knew what to look for could see the military bearing reasserting itself. Captain Morrison's face broke into the first smile anyone had seen from him. "Lieutenant Commander Martinez," he said, snapping to attention and rendering a crisp salute. "Ma'am, we have a code red situation. The Constellation took enemy fire during a humanitarian mission off the coast of Somalia. Sickbay is compromised, and we have multiple trauma cases that require immediate surgical intervention." Sarah returned the salute with the same precision, her entire demeanor shifting from civilian nurse to military officer in the span of a heartbeat. "Casualties, Captain. 15 wounded, 3 critical. Shrapnel wounds, blast injuries, possible internal bleeding." The ship's surgeon was among the casualties. Sarah nodded grimly. Equipment status? We've rigged a temporary surgical suite in the officer's mess. Basic equipment only, but functional. Flight time to the ship is 43 minutes. Understood. Sarah turned to address the stunned emergency department staff. Dr. Pemberton, Mr. Santos in Trauma Bay 1 is stable, but he'll need surgical removal of that rod within the next 6 hours. The chest tube I placed should maintain decompression until then. Dr. Pemberton could only nod mutely, still trying to process the revelation that the woman he had watched perform an impossible medical procedure was actually a decorated military surgeon. Sarah looked directly at Victoria, her dark eyes holding no malice, only professional courtesy. The patient assignments you gave me this morning were handled appropriately. Mr. Henderson will sleep for another hour, then wake up significantly calmer. Emma's sutures will hold, but watch for signs of infection. Mr. Kowalski responds well to mental stimulation. Keep him engaged, and he'll comply with treatment. Victoria felt tears of shame welling in her eyes. Sarah, we didn't know. You had every opportunity to treat a colleague with basic human decency, Sarah replied, her voice calm but firm. Instead, you chose cruelty based on assumptions and prejudice. She reached into her backpack, the same warm bag they had mocked, and withdrew a sealed manila envelope. My report on this facility's toxic workplace culture and its impact on patient care goes to the hospital board tomorrow morning. I've been conducting an undercover investigation for the past 6 months, rotating through different hospitals to assess civilian medical facilities for potential military partnerships. The envelope landed on the nursing station desk with the weight of a bomb. Victoria stared at it in horror, realizing that every cruel comment, every act of workplace bullying, every moment of unprofessional behavior had been documented by someone with the authority to end careers. Ma'am, Captain Morrison interrupted. We need to move. Those sailors won't survive much longer without surgical intervention. Sarah nodded and headed toward the locker room. Give me 90 seconds to change into uniform. As she disappeared through the doorway, the emergency department remained frozen in stunned silence. The 4 naval officers stood at attention, their presence a stark reminder that the woman they had dismissed and humiliated was about to fly into a combat zone to save lives under conditions that would terrify most civilian surgeons. The sound of the helicopter's rotors increased in intensity, preparing for immediate departure. Through the windows, they could see ground crew members performing final checks on the aircraft. Their movements urgent and professional. In exactly 90 seconds, Sarah Martinez would emerge from that locker room as Lieutenant Commander Martinez, and their world would never be the same. The locker room door opened with a soft click that somehow carried more weight than the thunderous helicopter rotors outside. What emerged was not the quiet, poorly dressed woman who had endured a day of mockery and humiliation, but Lieutenant Commander Sarah Martinez in full naval dress uniform, a transformation so complete it seemed like witnessing a metamorphosis. Her dress blue uniform was immaculate, pressed to razor-sharp creases that spoke of military precision and pride. The gold buttons gleamed under the fluorescent lights, each one polished to mirror brightness. Her black shoes reflected the overhead lighting like obsidian, and her white combination cap sat at the perfect angle prescribed by naval regulations. But it was the ribbons on her chest that told the real story, a core rainbow of colored fabric that represented a career most people could only imagine. The Navy Cross, second only to the Medal of Honor, sat prominently in the top row, its distinctive blue and white stripes immediately recognizable to anyone with military knowledge. Below it, the Purple Heart's purple and white ribbon indicated wounds received in combat. The Bronze Star with V device for valor, the Navy Commendation Medal with Combat 5, The combat action ribbon each decoration represented moments when Sarah had risked her life to save others. The emergency department staff stood in absolute silence as she walked past them, her military bearing transforming her from the woman they thought they knew into someone entirely different. Her stride was measured and purposeful, each step calculated with the precision of someone who had walked through war zones and emerged stronger. Victoria Ashford felt her legs trembling as Sarah approached the nursing station. The head nurse who had spent the day orchestrating cruelty and humiliation now found herself face to face with a decorated war hero whose service record put her own civilian accomplishments to shame. "Lieutenant Commander Martinez," Victoria stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. We had no idea who you were." If we had known, Sarah stopped directly in front of Victoria, her dark eyes holding a steady gaze that seemed to see straight through to the soul. When she spoke, her voice was calm and measured, but carried an authority that made everyone in the vicinity lean forward to listen. "If you had known I was a military officer, you would have treated me differently," Sarah said, her words cutting through the air like a surgical scalpel. "But the question you should be asking yourself, Nurse Ashford, is why my rank or background should matter when it comes to basic human decency." Victoria's face flushed red with shame. Around the nursing station, her colleagues Jessica, Amanda, and the others who had participated in the day's cruelty stood with their heads bowed, unable to meet Sarah's gaze. "You saw someone you perceived as beneath you," Sarah continued, her voice never rising but somehow filling the entire emergency department. "Someone whose clothes weren't expensive enough, whose background wasn't prestigious enough, whose presence didn't validate your own sense of superiority. And you chose to respond with mockery, exclusion, and deliberate humiliation." Dr. Pemberton stepped forward, his face pale with the realization of what had transpired under his watch. "Lieutenant Commander, I apologize for the behavior of my staff. If I had known—" "Doctor," Sarah interrupted, turning her attention to him, "you did know. You witnessed the treatment I received today. You heard the comments, saw the deliberate isolation, observed the unprofessional behavior. Your failure wasn't in not knowing my rank. It was in not intervening when you saw a colleague being mistreated." The words hit Dr. Pemberton like a physical blow. He had indeed witnessed the nursing staff's behavior throughout the day, and heard their whispered comments and cruel laughter. But he had chosen to ignore it, to focus on his own responsibilities rather than address the toxic culture that had developed in his department. Captain Morrison checked his watch with military precision. "Lieutenant Commander, we need to depart immediately. The situation aboard the Constellation is deteriorating." Sarah nodded and reached into her uniform pocket, withdrawing a thick manila envelope that she placed on the nursing station desk. The envelope was sealed with official tape and bore the letterhead of the Naval Medical Command. "This contains my complete report on the workplace culture at Metropolitan General Hospital," she announced, her voice carrying to every corner of the emergency department. 6 months of documented observations, recorded conversations, and detailed analysis of how this facility's toxic environment impacts patient care and staff performance. Victoria stared at the envelope as if it were a venomous snake. 6 months? You've been watching us for 6 months? I've been working undercover at various civilian hospitals as part of a Navy initiative to identify potential partnership facilities for military medical training, Sarah explained. Metropolitan General was recommended as a premier institution with excellent staff and patient care standards. My mission was to validate those recommendations. She paused, letting the implications sink in. Instead, I found a workplace culture characterized by bullying, elitism, and a complete disregard for the fundamental principles of healthcare compassion, respect, and teamwork. Jessica found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. What will happen to us?" Sarah's expression softened slightly, but her voice remained firm. That depends on the hospital administration and your willingness to change. The Navy was considering a multi-million-dollar partnership with this facility, joint training programs, research initiatives, equipment upgrades. That partnership is now in serious jeopardy. The financial implications hit the staff like a thunderbolt. In an era of tight healthcare budgets and increasing competition, losing a major military partnership could mean layoffs, reduced benefits, and potentially even closure of departments. However, Sarah continued, my report also includes recommendations for cultural reform and staff development programs. Change is possible, but it requires acknowledgement of the problems and a genuine commitment to improvement. Captain Morrison stepped forward again, his patience clearly at its limit. Ma'am, we have American sailors dying. We need to go now. Sarah straightened to her full height, every inch the naval officer she had always been. Understood, Captain. She turned back to the hospital staff one final time. The envelope also contains contact information for the Naval Medical Command's Partnership Review Board. If this facility demonstrates genuine reform over the next 6 months, the partnership may still be salvageable. As she began walking toward the exit, Victoria called out desperately, Lieutenant Commander, wait. How do we? What should we do? Sarah paused at the automatic doors, the sound of helicopter rotors growing louder as the aircraft prepared for immediate departure. Start by treating every person who walks through these doors with the same respect and dignity you would want for yourself or your family members. Judge people by their character and competence, not by their appearance or perceived social status. She looked back at the nursing staff, her expression serious but not unkind. Healthcare is supposed to be a calling, not a social hierarchy. Remember why you became nurses in the first place. The automatic doors slid open, and Sarah stepped into the rotor wash of the waiting helicopter. The downdraft whipped her uniform and sent debris flying across the parking lot, but she walked with steady purpose toward the aircraft. The 4 naval officers fell into formation around her, their movements synchronized with military precision. Through the hospital windows, the staff watched as Sarah climbed aboard the Seahawk helicopter. Even from a distance, they could see her transformation was complete. She moved with the confidence of someone heading into danger to save lives. Someone who had done this countless times before in far more dangerous circumstances. Next part coming soon.